Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It is so wonderful to welcome you to Ministers Week 2023. We are so excited. We're so excited that each of you have decided to join us here at University Christian Church by way of Brite Divinity School. I am Aretha Fluker, the Director of Community and Spiritual Life and the Director of Baptist Studies at Brite Divinity School. I joined the school in 2020, so it's almost my 3-year anniversary, so I'm happy to be in person this year for Ministers Week. It's been a long time coming, so I'm so excited for this opportunity. I am pleased to introduce to you our presenter of today's workshop, Reverend Danny Couch. Danny Couch has taken on a new role as Transitional Minister at Central Christian Church and Open Door Christian Church in Houston, Texas. Danny works to help churches transition from a business model to a team leadership discipleship model as he strives to help churches reach a world craving to hear God's word. Danny is a graduate of Texas Christian University and Brite Divinity School, and he celebrated 26 years of ministry at CCC in the spring of 2020. Danny has 3 daughters, a son, and a son-in-law. The special light in Danny's life is his 2-year-old grandson, Carson. Welcome, Reverend Danny Couch.
Like family reunion clap there. Howdy, man. I feel like I'm stuck here. I'm going to use this. I'll walk around a little bit too, so I want to be sure I stay on task here. I'm having to write due notes because I'll talk about this forever. Some of y'all may know that.
Yep.
I'm Danny Couch. Been ordained, I guess, late 80s, somewhere in there, and had a calling into ministry when I was in the 11th grade. And that's kind of important for me because I never had anything to do with church. I lived my life outside the church until around the end of my 8th grade year when I was my mom decided as a family was falling apart that church would be a good thing to do. I don't know if you ever experienced that in your ministry. Well, I was a product of that. And so what ended up happening was, went to the church, and then they said, hey, there's a couple of kids here my age, we're going to camp. It was a high school camp, so I was just in junior high. So I went. And as I was there, it was the first time in my life as a human being that I felt affirmation. I felt acceptance. I felt like I was special. And it took about 2 or 3 days to really try to figure out what the deal was. I didn't believe it. And so it took me a long time for me to really understand what grace was about and to feel it. And by the time I finished that camp, I did not want to go anywhere else. I definitely didn't want to go home because my home was not a place to go. But that was the time I really stepped into life of church just by chance, however you want to call that. But it changed my whole perspective of what life could be like, because I found acceptance. And as I got more involved with the youth group, more involved with that church, more involved with the leadership of the group, and started getting to doing the leadership through camp and Camp Wilder, it was then that I found purpose. And that made all the difference in the world to me. And so about 11th grade is when I started going to ministry, and then I started to go through the process. It's at TCU. But it's also there that I ran into the first thing that I really stumbled across, and that was confidence. Because I had to hear so many stories from people about what I wasn't. And so I didn't have a lot of confidence in myself about who I was, about what I was doing. I always felt like I was supposed to be somebody that I wasn't. And so I tried, well, I have to act a certain way, right? I have to be a certain thing. I have to do something differently. And so I had to go through a lot of soul searching my entire life, all the way through my ministry life even, to understand that, you know what? God called me into ministry for a reason. What's that reason? What's that purpose? That God put me there just the way I am. So that'd be kind of an insult to God to have to change who I am. Because God says, I like you because you can do certain things that no one else can do. But that's the way it is with all of us. And what I've experienced in the course of my 30 plus years of ministry is how much beating that we go through as ministers. We really do. And how we're not respected for our calling or for our ministry. We tend to be addressed more as employees than people who are called by God to do a specific task. I talk with a lot of my peers, a lot of my friends, and what I experience with a lot of them is there's a lot of lack of confidence, lack of understanding about what they're supposed to do. And their ministry has kind of been reduced to a job description that somebody else wrote many years ago. It's passed on to you, and you're asked to fulfill that. One of the first board meetings I went to in this church, I just finished up after 27 years. I just went to the board, and they got a big board like that, and said, why don't you tell me what you expect from your senior minister to do? And by the time we finished, there was 4 columns. I don't know, 50, 60 things on there. And we just kept going. But you don't, no, it wasn't on there. There was nothing on there that said, we want you to have a close relationship with God.
Yeah.
We want you to be a good parent. We want you to be a good person in the community. We want you to have a good marriage, a good family life. None of that. It was about do, and when you're done, do. So it was a lot of do. So and so when I looked at that list and talked to them, I circled about 6 things on that list. And I said, you know what? I really think this is why God called me to ministry, is to do these 6 things, because I really enjoy and find I'm really good at doing these 6 things. Who's going to do the rest? Yeah, it was this quiet. And then finally, a little voice in the background said, us? I said, well, that's what you call church. That's what we do. You know, we have people with strengths, people with weaknesses, and strengths help the weaknesses and things like that. We just kind of move forward and move the direction that we need to go. And so that was kind of the start of that. And so since then, there's been a lot of ironies that have taken place. In fact, one of the things that I've noticed too that was kind of different from when I was growing up, my grown up years, is that I was a product of the church reaching out and then showing me something that I never experienced before. So I'm at the advantage that I didn't grow up with church. I don't know how it's always been, because it's never been. And so I can look at things that the church does and have done my entire ministry and say, well, why do we do that? That doesn't make sense. Only to hear what I always heard from my dad was, because I said so. That doesn't make sense for us, for his ministers. And so a lot of the stuff that I have is a lot of things that I've experienced through the course of time, and have spent a lot of time thinking through a lot of different things about that. I remember my first church that I was a part of in seminary. It was I was sitting with the minister who was there. I was a youth minister because I was a seminary student, and he knew my grandfather, so he kind of took it upon himself to be my mentor, like it or not. And I remember we had a staff meeting which consisted of me and him, and I sat in a metal chair next to his desk, and he would lecture for the entire hour. and then it was done. But he let me know that what ministry was about was you have office hours from 9 to 12, you go to lunch, and then the afternoon is all about visitation. And it startled me. I was frightened. I thought, this isn't why I got into ministry. And I couldn't talk about it because he would kind of argue me down with that. And so, but it ended up being that I was supposed to be a certain thing that I knew that I wasn't. I was at that point in my life, I thought, no, there's more to my ministry than what this is. And so I know a good person would do is just fall into the same line and just be the pastor. But then I think Brain was thinking was, well, if we're busy pastoring to all the people in the church, what about those people outside the church who are hungry, who are thirsty, who need one, acceptance, and don't live with a purpose? What do we do with them? But we haven't really done anything. And so that was one of the things that I was having to confront with that. I remember also later in my seminary career, and some of y'all may remember this guy, Bill Eason, He came and spoke at TCU. We were encouraged to go hear that. I don't know if y'all have heard him. Easton Bandy was his partner. They did a lot of great books back in the day. And one of the things that has stuck with me throughout my ministry that I've used so many times and in so many ways was he said these words. He said, this is in the 90s, mind you, okay? That the most important question that Christians are going to have to answer in the years ahead is this. So what is so important, what is so critical about your faith and relationship with Jesus Christ that the world cannot live without it? And that really touched me a lot. Because he didn't just say, well, what do you like about Jesus? Or what do you like about church? Or where do you go to church? It's about, what is it about your relationship with Jesus Christ that the world cannot live without it? What is it? Because if we don't know how to answer that question precisely, consistently, with meaning and passion, then the church is going to fade. And so what we have seen since what, the 1990s, actually if you can go back to the mid-60s, is just the slow trend of the church fading away. And there hasn't been anything we've been able to do to stop the bleeding. It just goes and goes and goes. And I've reminded people a lot of times that people say, well, it'll bounce back. It'll bounce back. Well, what if that was your 401k? When would you bail on that one? My guess would be in the 70s. But we just keep thinking of it because it's something that we've always done. It's going to bounce back. It's going to come back. And that never really has. And now COVID just sped things up even faster. And I don't know if you know this. Sometimes people say, well, Danny, just so negative all the time. And I think I'm just kind of a realist, but disciples are really good at, we lead the league, of all denominations of fading faster than the other denominations. You know that? By 3 times. We're just not poking our head out about to finish the line. 3 times we're fading 3 times faster than any other denomination. And that's concerning to me. It's concerning because we've used the same model that we've started with and we haven't changed. And that model probably goes back to, I don't know, after the end of World War II, when we saved the planet. It's good enough for the planet, it's good enough for the church. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that and what all that means. Any more thoughts on any of that anybody wants to share? Because we're going to do an exercise here in a little bit. And I want you to participate in that exercise with me. Good. Well, one thing I want us to talk about here is one of the things I've done through the course of my ministry and probably pretty well in the last, Dan, 10, 15 years even, going back there, is really trying to address these problems and come up with a different way of which we could do church. And so one of the things that I find as I've been doing this ministry is kind of look a little bit at your churches and think about where you are in your churches. And I want you to think about what is the most important document that your church has. And it can't be the Bible. So I want you to think about the most important document that it has. Any idea? Y'all just want to throw one out? If you had to pick and say one of the documents?
Constitution and bylaws.
Constitution and bylaws? Who wrote those? The budget. Yeah.
Yeah.
Administrative procedures.
Mission statements.
Mission statements. Values. Yeah. I think in today's church, if we start thinking about it, for today's church, I think the most important document that we can have is one that we don't necessarily have. And that's an identity statement. It's a statement that says, well, who are we as a congregation? Not as a denomination. We're not talking about what was written in the late 60s. We're talking about your congregation. Who are you? Where do you bound? What's important to you? What do you value? And I'm working with a church in Houston, been doing it for 3 years, and we had so much fun putting that together as a congregation, which is a small group. But it was very, very important for us to do that. And so what I want to do is I want you to play the game with me, okay? So if you can find a person, 2 or 3 people, you're gonna do this together with them, okay? So go find somebody.
Turn my chair Bobby's gone. How are you? I knew we met before. I'm Ken Hall. And you're? Yeah, I used to be over here at TDL. Yeah, I was at TDL.
You ready?
Yeah, I was there for 30 years.
If you have somebody who's a note taker.
Oh, okay.
This is a fellowship dinner.
Jim Summers.
Hello.
I used to live next to Danny and Summers.
You can make dinner plans. We'll go from there. Is this on? Okay. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to think about a culture statement or identity statement. And this is what I did with one congregation. I turned it this way. If you were to create a culture, an environment, a place where you want your child, your grandchild, your partner, your best friend, your neighbor to grow up and be raised and be affected by it, what would that culture, what would that community look like? What are some of those attributes that would take place in there? What do you want to see happen in there? What's important to you? What do you value? If you could create a place that people would say, that is what I want my child to be influenced by, or my grandchild, or my friend, or my neighbor to be a part of, I would be so happy to bring them in to be a part of this process. What would they do? How would they treat each other? How would they treat one another within that group? How would they treat people in the community? What is so important about this that they would want to be a part of that? And so I want you to start brainstorming on some of those characteristics of what it would look like for you to create this space. What would be in that space? What would be that culture, that environment? And let me talk about this. Culture is 2 things. The culture is what you want to create and what you will create. And the second thing in culture is what you allow to take place within it, okay? So I want you to think about what you would create that you would be so proud to have your children be raised in it, or someone very, very close to you be raised in that culture. You know, do that? I'll give you 2, 3 minutes, just throw out some attributes on that.
And you're in that church. I know, I was just, the same thing, yeah, I mean, this is our identity statement.
I use that term so often, but I just read, when I say that, it has to look very much like the community,
So, I would
Yeah.
like to.
It has to, that's my critique of this congregation which I belong to. But when I get here, instead of going here, it doesn't look like anything like my neighborhood in to relate, it has to be.
And so you're doing the same, you're doing the same, and.
Loving, caring.
Forgiving.
Yeah, oh yeah, that's part of love.
Thank you.
Pick one, anyone, don't show me.
Nancy Brite. She said that to you? Does she know? Okay, good.
community, that they worship first how you find. And we facilitate that.
It has to be a culture and a community which address the issues that people are talking about. So often,
Well, and maybe she did that on
my wife
purpose to
gets
try and get you to that place, or
I keep saying so often in church, nobody really addresses it. I don't mean that. I don't mean that we're really a community. We're very comfortable with our space. That we deal with just those issues that are rolling around in that, and we don't deal with the stuff that's knocking on the door.
I think the environment is where you feel comfortable talking about things. You don't have to worry. Not that everybody's going to agree, but you feel I can throw this out, don't bother me.
Nobody's going to
Yeah.
Texas.
nobody's going to judge you for saying what you experience and what you've been doing.
Now,
I think you have to be
Ordained I called her like to chat. Bill and Mary last Sunday was 2 weeks ago. And so and Nathan's was very interested. But
Were you ahead of a couple of years,
well, and that's the thing. I think, like he was saying, when you find a place where you feel about who you are, genuinely, that's
where you reside, relationships, what impact you have,
I'm going to cut us off right here, because there's some things on this that I want you to grasp on this one. And I'm going to tell you the reason why I think these identity statements are very important to us. Because it goes along with what Ethan was talking about some 30 years ago, about we have to know exactly who we are if we're going to be effective in this world around us. There's so much things that are competing for people's times and effort. And so we need to know right off the bat what it is that who we are and what we can offer people. And so what I like about these identity statements is that it lets the congregation kind of work through a process of what would be the ideal place for the church to be like. What would be the place to raise people, to bring people in without shame of being asked to leave because you're wearing shorts or have coffee in the sanctuary or someone else's pew. All those important issues that take place, right? Or getting griped at for whatever reason because someone's having a bad day. And so it's very important for us to say, this is the culture we want to create. And the white sheet you have on there is the sheet that we created for the church in Houston. And so this identifies exactly who they are. And why this is so incredibly important is for 4 reasons. Because the first thing, this is what everyone said we want to do. Now I'll also let you know, we did not vote on this. What? Our congregation does not vote. We do this weird thing called discernment. We actually have conversations.
Wow.
We call things like trusting people because people are growing and maturing in their faith. So the first thing that's important about this is that this tells you who you are. And so there's nothing that can be set aside that says, okay, well, I don't agree with that. That doesn't matter. This is who we are. And the second thing it's going to tell people in the congregation they need to do is that you are expected to grow and mature in your faith to be this. So if you are a hothead and you want to lash out at people, that's not a part of our culture, right? You need to be a part of the culture that says, I'm going to reconcile, I'm going to be patient with each other, I'm going to be loving and caring, because that's who we are. And it's very important because it tells people in the congregation that you are expected to grow in your faith. What expectations do we place on church members? Exactly, right? We don't have any. You know, just don't commit major crimes. That might be the only major thing we set up for our church members. We just want people there because why? The numbers we need the numbers on the back on both. That's how we get, most of the times we get judged by how those numbers are showing up. But there's really very little stated expectations that we place on people. So if we say, here's who we are, and this is what we're going to do, this is who we're going to become, this is the thing that we're going to advertise and show the whole world about who we are, and it's our responsibility as a people to agree to it, and then we covenant to it, and then we do the things we need to grow in it. And so in our church, how do you grow into it? Well, you're going to worship consistently. You're going to be a part of a small group that's designed to actually grow and understand Scripture, but also do caregiving with that. And you're also going to find a ministry that uses your gifts and your abilities and your passions with other people in church. So there's nobody occupying a pew. We eliminated the appendix from the body of Christ. Okay? And that's what we have to do. Because this whole thing of 20% of the people, 80% of the work, it's not going anywhere. And so we're trying to help people find the place where they need to go. So the first thing it does, it tells us who we are. Second thing is, it reminds us, hey, we have responsibility to living this and growing and deepening our relationship with God. The third thing it does, it's going to tell the community who you are. This is our promise to you. If you come to be a part of us, this is what you can expect. This is who we are. And we're going to live up to it. And the fourth thing that does is that when people say, I want to be a part of the church, then those expectations then are placed on those who are wanting to be a part of the church. Which means what? There has to be a process where they have to learn, grow, be oriented into the life of the church, understand who you are and what you're about. And so they can take their place within the life of the church. And everybody is expected to worship consistently. Everyone is going to be part of a group where they're growing, learning, understanding Scripture, and taking care of each other. Everyone is going to be a part of some form of a ministry. So everybody has to do this. It's an expectation we place, and we take covenants to be all about that. So this opens up a can of worms, doesn't it? A lot of worms. There's a lot of layers to this. And so some of the questions on this white sheet, if this was your sheet, there's some questions here that you need to kind of talk through. So the question would be, how do you go about creating this culture that we're really striving to do? And by the way, we call this culture in the church the kingdom of God. On earth as it is in heaven. And so this is our best understanding, our best effort to make this kingdom happen. Or whatever language you choose to use on that. But this is what we refer to that. And so this is our responsibility to build this. 100% of us. So if you want to be a part of us, be a part of this kingdom, let's figure out how we can take our place within this kingdom, okay? And so I want you to look at how do you make it happen? How do you create this culture? And here's the big ones. What threatens this culture? Now you can only spend 30 minutes on that one, I know that, right? Because what do you allow to take place that destroys the culture? Because here's the deal, we're dealing with people who aren't in the church. They're not going to go to a place that's chaotic, where there's conflict, where there's hateful glares, where there's a poor spirit, where there's grumbling because they don't like the music, or the music's too loud, or A or B or C. People want that. They want a place they can be lifted up and be reminded who they are, that they're valued, that they're accepted, and that God has a purpose for their life. How do you create that culture? What do you allow? Who is going to be the ones that protect that culture? Who are the parents, right? Who's going to do those? How do you, and the other thing, how do you continue to grow that culture? Because you just can't do it one time, throw it in the file cabinet, and then discover it in a time capsule some other day, right? As we do mission statements. Because this is more important to me in our day and time for the new church, more important than a mission statement. Because you have to know who you are. It will drive what you do. Because if we're who we are and we're being led by the Spirit, then there's no telling where that Spirit's going to lead us. You can't put a 5-year plan on God, right? So you have to be in a position where you're growing, maturing, you're listening to where the Spirit is leading you. How do you continue to do that, right? And here's the most important one for y'all. What's your role in it? Besides changing light bulbs, right? What is your role in this whole process of that? There are so many layers to this, you can't even begin to imagine, that really changes how the church has to be structured. Because this business model we have does not allow these things to take place. And I think the biggest gift that we can give to the church is a long-term ministry and a strong back that says we need to do this to get the church from point A to point B. And you don't do it alone, because you have that other question in there that says, who protects the culture? That's the key. So take a little bit of time and just ask those questions. Try not to chase rabbits and talk about how much you like the old minister better and things like that. Just to kind of focus on those types of questions when you ask with that group. So assuming that you wrote this yourself, ask those questions and try to answer that the best of your ability. Okay? Give you a few minutes for that.
So how do you go about creating?
I see this in, I don't think this is.
But this is more of a living.
I'm saying our is.
Oh, that's a good point.
When you start it's already inside the language.
Yeah. Now maybe that's the question to ask is why. And I think the answer needs to be, this is how we're going to live out our faith. And not that every church is going to do it exactly the same way, but this is how we as a congregation are going to live out our faith calling to God in Jesus Christ. You're being awful quiet. Yeah, I smell something profound going on.
It's a question I'm
I think our mission statement has no limitation on it.
Yeah.
5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever. You can revisit it and concur with it a little bit, but it doesn't really. This basically says this is what we want to become.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good point.
This is what we want to become.
Three is identity. Is what we want to become.
Right. Mission is church. In 10 years, you know, it might say 10 years, we want this congregation to grow to a congregation of 500.
I wouldn't even do that. I think it was under one more.
Yeah, well, that's the overall goal, and this is what we're going to do to get there. That kind of stuff. While this one says I'm going to grow in my relationship. I don't hear in this one somebody judging me. I'm held accountable, but I'm not judged.
So I guess how do you create it is answering the why question in the first place.
And
Why are we in
check-
church? Why are we here?
Yeah, and checking in with one another to make sure, how are you doing? How are things going with you today?
Yeah,
How can I help you?
exactly.
Rather
But
than-
again, the new person.
So anyway, I think this is a good idea. These are all good questions.
Have any interest in
For you, yeah, no. She and I, she was directed me, so we've had this whole conversation.
Yeah, I hear that. He used one reference, just a simple thing about the cost of alcohol. There are still today churches that say you can't come in and come up to
Business.
Oh yeah, all the little things that keep us.
you can't come in with a cup of coffee in the center, and there are other churches that are permission giving and say, okay, you can come in with a cup of coffee, just don't leave the empty cup inside.
Oh, bring your donuts and your coffee, and
Yeah.
bring them, yeah.
And I mean, they structure something around it. It prevents people from coming in. I think back when I was in my wife would constantly get at me for doing this, but I would say to her that we're going to this congregation this morning, and we're not very we're just gonna walk in like a stranger coming in, and sure, and I said we're gonna give you Sunday school first of all, just to see what's going on. Many times, the response we got once we were introduced to the congregation in official capacity differed quite a bit from the response we had as strangers walking in. Yeah, people didn't know us, and so they perceived us one way, and some people passed us and said a word, and some people don't. But very few recently said, are you masked? Are you new in town? What are you seeking? Can we be of help to you?
Well, and that's part of the culture. I kind of look at it, probably put it in a way that most people can understand. It's kind of like being a coach of a team. You set the culture as a coach. As a pastor, we're like, oh, we're a congregation, but you set the tone. You're not the only leader, but you're the one people look to. Because Jackie and I, my wife and I, co-pastor, and all the time we're like, we better take care of that. Well, that's so-and-so's job. Yeah, but you know who you're going to yell at. And we don't always do it, and sometimes one people come to us and go, well, maybe we can fix it, But it's about helping the congregation to set that tone. And if somebody new comes in, and it's, well, why are you doing this? Well, this is who we are. This is, love each other because, whatever, like you said, because God's what God does. And we respond to that love, we look out for each other, we don't put up with bad behavior in the congregation. that gets addressed by our church family, probably the elders or myself, both. And like we used to have, for example, one thing is we're starting to get rid of our church bullies because our congregation had them for years. And it was always the same old thing. You know, so-and-so is really being inappropriate. Oh, that's so-and-so. That's just good old so. You just got. And I was like, I heard that. And I said, no, it's not acceptable. So I confronted it. We don't have that problem anymore. And there's somebody else I know. We got another family that's heading out the door because they're acting inappropriately. And it's not being accepted. Because in a way, the culture is changing and saying we're not accepting this anymore. You know? Yeah. You attract more and
We had Bridget for the first time on Sunday. 24 years old, graduate student.
Absolutely.
Been following you online for 2 months. Really attracted to the website, edited the series. She said, 25 days.
All right.
And to me, you know,
that makes a difference. It's different.
One question quick.
23, 24.
Go with me?
I've been watching it from a distance. I needed to know this was a safe place.
Yeah.
And I think you all actually looking out.
Yeah. Really like y'all's conversation, where it's going. I want to tell you something. When I started ministry, I remember out of San Antonio came this church that it was labeled as the high expectation church. That if you want to go to that church, you have to do certain things. You had to do more than just show up. And so they had this list of things that were expected of them. And I thought to myself, are you crazy? You'll never get anybody to want to go to church if you expect them to do anything. You know, you got to be a worship. You got to. They went into learn how to tithe and do all this stuff that with all of our faith stuff that was so important that our parents and grandparents grew up. I didn't grow up in that era, but they talked about that. I thought that is nuts. But the response that people had for that is that it really grew, and it grew because people go to church or seeking the church for a reason. You know, they want to get from point A to point B. How do I get there? And if we don't engage in that conversation, if we don't sit with them and talk with them and say, well, here's how we can find where you are to where God needs you to be, and we'll walk through that every step of the way, there has to be a process that people have to go through. Because it just doesn't happen, does it? You know, I wanted to be a minister. I had to spend 7.5 years with these guys. That was painful. But I didn't. Right? But it's what we do in order to understand that. And so we have to recapture a lot of that because there's so many things, not only about this faith that are so important to us, but what we find as disciples of Christ to be spot on. And I get really tired of hearing that we're the best kept secret in the world.
Yeah.
At some point, we got to really put our faith in display, right? And be who we're called to be. And that is empowering people once again. But the current system we use doesn't empower people. It controls more people, right? The old business structures of doing things. There's only certain things we can do that we can't get, that we really can't be doing. And so that's one of the things I want us to think about as we enter this. And I'll ask some questions here in a minute. But I really want to go back to what I heard Eason talk about in the lecture when he said, what's the most important thing, what is so incredibly important about your relationship with Jesus Christ that the world can't live without? And I just want you to visualize two things. One, how many people you have on worship on Sunday morning? And then the bigger number, how many are members of your church? We all have several hundred members, but only 40 maybe show up and worship. But what would happen? What if? What would happen to your church? What do you think would happen in your community of faith if everyone who is a member of your church could answer that simple, not that question, in a very profound way, where it really captures the imagination of those that they're talking to? Because there are more people who have never even walked into the door of a church before than there are people in the church. And that number is increasing. And so we have to not think about what we like about disciples, but we have to think about how we can communicate who we are to people who are seeking acceptance. We see it all over the world right now, but also they're seeking purpose for their life. The logical place for them to go to find those two answers is the church. And so maybe we need to think about how we communicate that and what we do. And so I'm going to ask for some questions now. There's a lot of questions maybe coming up that you might have regarding this. Anybody have a question from your conversations? I really do appreciate the things that are taking place.
I have a question.
Okay.
Think about this.
Serving as pastor of a denomination that is dying faster than any other denomination. You talk about, so when I was talking about this, my thought was, how does a denomination answer these questions? Who are we? And what can we say we are? Like, how do we grow then as a denomination? My congregation's growing, so I'm not worried about that. But how do we still relate back to our denomination now?
That's an excellent question. I think that's one that really hasn't been answered right now. But one thing that I think there's a lot of attempts to do that, and I think this is one of them that we're seeing right now. Is what does the church, the future of the church look like? What's it going to be like? Is this going to be way different than it has been? I think that we can agree with that because the needs are so much different than that. And, I really don't know what the denomination is going to do, but I do know this, that denominations are becoming less important for people outside the church. So I think it's more critical that churches go through a process of discovering who they are and naming the ministry that they are and the people they are and expecting people to grow into that and not worry about the others. We have to get ourselves healthy. We have to get ourselves to a point where God can say, you know what? I'm hearing these prayers. I'm going to send people to your church because this is what they need from you. Because what they need, your church can fulfill that.
We started as a movement of congregations.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got that identity that has carried us to this point. To reimagine, to reclaim that identity for your church or other churches that are experiencing this kind of growth can be shared, can spread, can become contagious. We can learn from each other. And I think that may be one of the things also that where the denomination or the region or whatever structure we have can help us in sharing that kind of relationships.
Yes. And one thing too is the biggest difference between those who are older than me and those who are younger than me, I'm right on the line. I'm on that weird line. It's a difference of they want to feel, the younger people want to feel the presence of God. They want to feel that longing that God has for them. They want to feel more than they want to think. We're thinkers. We like to think. And I'm cursed with that as well. I say cursed, but they want to feel. They want to walk into a presence that's uplifting. They want to, and I have this this weird thing happened to me, and Dan was a part of that too. We had this big meeting at the church. We really wanted a meeting. Said, hey, let's do a discipleship movement, right? So everybody wants to learn what it means to be a disciple. We'll take our faith on a deeper level. Whoever wants to participate in that, let's do it. So we had like a lot of people there, 60 people there. And so we're all excited. And then the energy was great. We're doing fantastic. And then one lady stands up. And that started it off. Well, don't you think we're already doing that already? What makes you think? And the whole energy of the building, and I'm not kidding you, it was on high because we thought we were talking about doing this for a long time. It just, the sales just went out of sales. And I just remembered, my head went straight down thinking, what is going on? Because she didn't have to be here. And then that started a second one. And then a third one. And I didn't know what to do. I mean, I'm very rarely lost for words. At least I have some good sarcasm to kind of get me through life. But what I did is I looked up and I saw the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, moving away, walking out the door and taking a left and disappearing. And I remember thinking and watching this take place and say, don't leave, don't leave. So we have the ability to invite the Spirit and maintain the Spirit and allow that joy to take us over. Or we can let things happen in our culture that says, you know what, I'm in control. We don't need the Spirit here. And the hard thing to do is to make sure that those folks who I refer to as elders are the healthiest ones in the church, who can be the ones who say, you know what, we're not going to do that here because this goes against who we are. And if we can do that on a congregational level, and then it begins to build, I think then our churches on a larger scale can really take off from there. But something has to move it in that direction. Thanks for that question.
You've got all in all caps
Mm-hmm.
and underline. I see advantages to that, and also advantages and disadvantages to when congregations become explicitly open and affirming, because we codify some language. UCC had an article several months ago, Granville Walker, peace be upon him, talked about integrating the church. He said, we're not going to create a new policy. We're going to be who we said we are from the beginning. We have no creed but Christ. Anyone that comes in and makes a profession of faith, whoever the first person of color is that does that, that will be the integration of the church. They're not going to set a specific policy. So I see it. That's really cool. And I can also see some reasons why we want to codify that we are an anti-racist, pro-reconciling church, and open and affirming, explicitly naming LGBTQ persons. So how do you work out that tension when so many churches like to use and abuse the word all?
Right. And that's why it's in capital. And that's something that the congregation has to come to terms with. I remember one year we dealt with the issue on homosexuality. We had a gay person who was in our staff, and they came out. And so that was a struggle that the elders had to work through. And so and it took about 2 years to work through that. And so what the elders came up with, which I thought was great, was that, you know, we're trying to get too specific on these details of stuff. We are going to make a statement that says that all people are welcome to the table, and all people are encouraged to find their gifts for ministry that Christ has given to them and use them to the way that God has commanded them to do, period. End of discussion. And so we made that statement as elders. They came together really close. They oversaw that. We had 9 families get up and leave. And that was the best thing that ever happened to that congregation.
Oh, yeah.
Because we made a statement. All means all. And it doesn't matter what they are or who they are or anything about that. It does not change what we do. We have one job to do. We love. That's it. We don't have to judge, we don't do anything. That's not our job, our responsibility.
Push back on that,
Mhm.
just a little bit, to say, especially for people in the LGBTQ community, we have heard, love the sinner, hate the sin. So I'm suspicious anytime someone
Sure.
says, we're gonna love everybody.
Love everybody to repent.
What,
Love everybody to change.
what is your definition of love? And, you know, so I get the tension. I wish I had a better understanding of, you know, does this.
Well, and that is for the congregation to determine what that looks like. For the congregations that I've been a part of, love is blind. And it's not about loving the sin, hate, love the sinner. No, you love people, period.
I know, but unless you can, so what, love is blind is not that much different than saying love is colorblind. And until someone can see what it means to be a gay person in ministry, 16 rejection letters in search and call before I had one yes, until you can see that, you can't see me. And until you can see me and name, you can't love me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll call BS on that.
But
So,
would that be part of the identity of the congregation doing it, to have that conversation?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you gotta be specific.
which here's the flip side of that. I served a congregation, they called me as senior pastor. They've never had an open and affirming conversation. They've never taken a vote. They're like, you look like a pastor to us. So I get this.
So do you want, okay, so then do you want them to vote? Do they need to vote?
I would left if they vote.
You're saying they just love you? Or do they have to have a vote to affirm you? Do you feel affirmed? My hunch is you feel affirmed. You sound affirmed to me.
Yeah, so when they called, that was a vote for affirmation.
Exactly.
No,
You had your
doubt.
vote.
But at the same time, I deal, and I don't want to derail the conversation here, with multiple microaggressions every week from people saying, you know, you look normal.
Idiots everywhere.
And like, I am glad I meet your definition, because I can put on a shirt and a tie and look acceptable
Sure.
and straight to you.
Sure.
When we put forth our inclusion statement and started putting it forth, and it is it's always in, we say it's, a year from now going to probably look a little different as we continue to live into what that means. But, I'm in the Houston area, and if you put any search engine, inclusive, LGBTQ, whatever, into it, the first 2.5 pages are in fact Southern Baptist churches and evangelical churches, because they know how to use the search engine optimization.
Yep.
And so we're, even though we have, and so we're in the process of trying to change that, but they want to say, oh yes, you're welcome in our churches, and then they're there to change them.
Yeah.
And so the issue of, is this a truly safe place for me, becomes, I think, the key, and that has to be very clear. I remember early in my ministry sitting down with some pastors who said in the early 70s they wanted to make very strong statements about, that we are an inclusive congregation, we will welcome people, different races, they can be in different leaderships, and the congregation said, of course, they already know that. And so they said, we won't make it in public, and said, it was our failure. Nobody of color joined our congregation because they didn't know if they could trust them.
So Danny, this is a good conversation, for East Texas. We want to be the church for all people, but East Texas might speak a little bit different language or so than the Metroplex, We're a little backwards sometimes, but we still love. Are there guidelines that might help us to learn how to phrase an identity statement?
Well, I don't know, I'm just revealing what this congregation did, and what your congregation does is strictly up to you. For this group, we have a woman elder who's gay, and she also has a spouse that's there. So it's not an issue with us. And so we're, you know, and the theory is, if you're not open and affirming, then you're not a church. You're not. You know, because I don't see Jesus saying, well, I only accept certain groups of people. None of which are white, by the way. Right? And so you have to get real about that, and that's where you have to continue. For this document, what we do, instead of having the congregational meeting at the end of the year where everybody gets to fight, what we do is that we bring this out again, and we celebrate who we are. And all the people that we've done to led us to this point, and the people who are going to lead us to the point for the ministry to come ahead for the year. But we're always looking at who we are, and what we do, and what we're called to be, recommit by doing our covenants again, and to take our place within this. So we have a lot of conversation. I mean, a lot of conversation. And with anybody that wants to talk about it. And I think that's the big key. Because, you know, if a group, the church can say that they're open and affirming, but they're not, what's the point of saying that? If it's just, to me, it's all how you communicate that. It's how your group says is who we are. It's how you treat people. It's all that kind of stuff. And that is the growth process that we have to expect our congregants to go through. Because if you're really digging into the whole understanding of who Christ is, what he did, how he did it, who he ministered to, how he ministered to people, and the very fact that the only obstacle Jesus had in his life was the church. The same obstacle that we have today to being a whole people of God. That means our transformation has to take place within each of these congregations. I mean, how many of you go and read the disciple thing in the hymnal every day?
Yeah.
I can't tell you what it was. But I agreed with when I first read it. But that's not something I just go home and see if I can go to sleep with every night. Because it's not that important to me. It's important that I'm a part of this umbrella, but I've also been into a lot of disciple churches that would not welcome me. I mean, we had to take my friend and go all the way to California so he could get, to be permission to have ordination. Yeah. To me, that's hypocritical. And I'll do anything you can to have people go from here to where God needs them to go. There should be no obstacle other than our own personal journey that we try to get there. And so that is what we have to work through at our congregations, and we cannot be afraid to bring up those issues. You know, people say, well, I don't agree with that. That's fine. There's a lot of people that you can go be a part of. But as far as this house is concerned, all people is the biggest word in the vocabulary. Right there. That's who we are. You don't have to like it, but that's who we are. But you have to respect people in the way that we set out to do that. And there's a lot of different ways you can phrase it or whatnot, but go ahead.
Just say a little more about the health of the elders, because I know it's a big thing for you, and you barely said that. Say a little more about what you think about that.
Well, what I think is important is two things. There's a lot of different things I think are important when redoing this church structure or whatever. I think the first one has to do with us. You know, what drives me crazy is that we risk everything we can to answer a call from God, to do the things that we believe God is calling us to do, and then we go somewhere and we're not allowed to do that call. Or we get limited on what we think God needs us to do. And so we get pigeonholed with the job description, right? What does that do for our confidence? Yeah, it goes down the toilet, doesn't it? Or we get frustrated, and all of a sudden plumbing looks pretty good for a living, right? And so there's all different. We're not doing what God calls us to do. And so this one thing I like to do is we need to work on ourselves and understand who we are, what we're capable of doing, what God is calling us to do, and own that. And also communicate that to whoever group of people that we're going to be working with, would be the church or anybody else, that this is who I am. We need to understand what our ministry gifts are, our leadership gifts are. What are we? And name that. So this is what it is. This is who God created me to be. And the second thing is, we have to have the best support group in the church. That has to be your elders.
Amen.
And if we do not transform our elders to step up and be the ones that work with us, not against us. And I don't mean 40% of them, 100% of them. If they're not the most mature people in your congregation, then they need to be one of the way up there in the very top. Because they're the ones who have to take on the vision that we have and move it together and be one voice So we can step back and let them do the leading of that voice. Too many times we're isolating ourselves, right? We get tired of the bickering, so, oh, heck, well, I'm just gonna do it, and then we get stabbed. That happens all the time. If you were in steel, you're okay, you can handle it a few times. But then, what you have to do is you have to build that group of people up. And there's a way in which you do that, because one of the characteristics that they need to be doing is they need to be the ones who do the conflict resolution stuff. So when someone comes up and says, well, I don't like you because I think you're this or that, that's fine. If you start acting out, here comes someone that says, hey, let's talk through this. Let's see what's going on, because we're trying to be a part of this community of faith. This is what it means to do that. They also need to be the ones who hold you accountable. And what I mean by that, God gave you a gift. Are you using it? Or are you too busy, cleaning toilets, or getting ceiling tiles, or doing those types of things? And so they need to say, we need to get you where God needs you to be. What do we need to do to help you? Or are you too busy getting chased by this or that person? And hold accountable for that. So it needs to happen too. Yeah?
So this is where I feel like Heather's question about disciple identity is really important, because several things you named. Elders. In many of our churches, ordained an elder, always an elder. And if they stay in positions, and if they are not elders who buy into your identity statement, then they can sabotage everything, and that has happened. Also, the disciple mantra, we agree to disagree. I am so sick of that. And I really feel like that has done more damage to our conversations around identity and who we are. Because the minute you get an elder who disagrees with your identity statement, or it blows up, just like the Holy Spirit walking out the door. So I think we do need, as a denomination too, to revisit these categories of who we are as a church, to help us out in the local church.
Well, I don't know if necessarily, I'll be the devil's advocate for that.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
You agree to disagree?
Yeah, well.
You're so wrong. Let me remind you how wrong you are.
Yeah.
No, I mean, because what happens, we're congregations.
Yes.
And what happens in our congregation is far more personal than what happens on a larger role. And I'm okay with saying, hey, we have this umbrella as a denomination that says this is who we should be affirming and what we should be doing. And I think that's fantastic. But when it comes down to who we really are, it's going to be depending on who your demographics are, really. Mm-hmm. It's going to be about who the people are. I mean, there's so many things you can do that personalize who you are that are very, very important. But in terms of elders, clean house. Yeah. I mean, that's as simple as that. And how you don't go in there, just kicking people out, because they've been in there for 485 years. But what you do is that we've done to clean up the elders, you do a study for a year. People who are antagonistic, they don't like to be controlled by studies, and they don't want somebody to police them, so to speak, about doing things that are bad. Antagonistic people like where there's no rules,
Right.
except their own. And they can control a room like nobody's business because they inject fear.
Everybody else values being nice.
Correct.
Which means you need to step into your pastoral authority and not just be complacent and placate people, which I think we were taught, my generation was taught to do in seminary. I think we have to step it up a little bit. But one of the things you said in creating your culture was that you assimilate. That's what I'm going to say. You assimilate people, like new members in. And I think we need to constantly be in this dialogue with our congregants, not just our new people, that we are constantly bringing people on board to what our mission and vision, identity statement is, and making sure our culture is over everybody. So we don't agree to disagree, and we definitely don't say all are welcome, because
There's a lot of that, people say that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
There's one
not
way
just
to
that,
figure.
but like we are an inclusive congregation, and if you do anything that doesn't uphold that, there are 100 other churches within a quarter of a mile
Exactly.
you can go
Right,
to.
right.
Yeah,
Let's help you find that place.
yeah.
But that's where the strength of the culture
Mhm.
comes into play when you've got that. I had a group of elders in the church, and one of the elders who had come on had a history of food problem, became very much of a problem and toxic. And the elders came to me and said, we're gonna take care of this. We're his peer groups, we know him, we've known him for years and years and years. This is not your responsibility, it's ours. And I knew at that point, they would take care of it appropriately, and they did.
Yeah,
And that's the strength of the
That's good
culture
stuff.
that you build.
yeah. You know, I always esteem the elders are the parents of the church, you know? If you have a functional parents, you got a good shot of being a good family. But if your parents are like mine, yeah, you end up like me. And so, you know, and so, I mean, really, and you think about what parents do, is that when one of us act out. And one thing we don't do as parents is we don't allow our kids to vote, right? Because we're allowed to vote, we would never have one green vegetable on our plate. It'd all be ice cream. Everything's unhealthy for us. And that is, and I used to do this all the time. Every time I baptized kids, I pull them out of the water and say, congratulations, you now have the ability to fire the preacher. You know, because that's what the way it was. You know, I always thought, why do we do that? Why do we do that? Just because they're an adult doesn't mean they're mature. So we don't need to treat them like they're mature just because they're an adult, or they've been there longer. Hey, good stuff on that white piece of paper. I think on the second page, I got kind of printed that way. That's my name and number. So if you need more questions, if you need some stuff going on, this is what I do. If you have questions about elders, want to help do that. I'm also talking to a few ministers because they're kind of struggling with a lot of their confidence in what they want to do. And so I'm going to put together a class online that we can actually go through different stages of the processes to help us determine what it is that we're really being called to do. Because that's one thing, I want to remind us one thing. You remember back in the day, no, but when doctors would go to the house, right? And then they'd deliver the baby, and then they'd go set someone's leg, and then they'd do open heart surgery all on a single day. What's happened in those days now? We have specialists, don't we? Every doctor knows you wouldn't dare go to one doctor to get another surgery done. And so we have to be specialized as well. We have to know exactly what it is that we're good at doing. Or do we get, are we an apostle, are we a prophet, are we evangelists, are we pastors, are we teachers? And we need to look at that, and then also allow other people to take on the things that we're not really good at doing, because once we begin to discover and use most of our time and effort on those things that we're super good at doing and enjoy doing as our ministry, then you'll have a very fulfilling ministry. If you get stuck doing pastoral calls like I was told to do, then I'm going to go look for plumbing. And so we need to be able to understand who we are more fully. So I'll be doing that. If anybody's interested in doing that, text me or whatever you want to do, okay? Anything else?
Yes. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining Reverend Couch's workshop. I hope that this time has been insightful for you, and it has been transformative, and it's planted some seeds. I also hope that you'll wrestle, and you'll continue to name, and you'll continue to be courageous in your ministry work. Thank you again, Reverend Couch. Thank you all for being